Hey, Patrick. Thanks so much, man, for your work in week 9. Got some really good, thoughtful responses, and thanks for wading through some of the especially dense reading by Agamben, and then Talbus's stuff is pretty difficult as well. By way of reply, I thought I'd try to clarify at least a couple things in the Agamben reading that I think you're hearing rightly from what you've written, and that maybe I could just shed a little bit more light on. So, um, Agamben, when it comes to the remnant, as you say, understands Paul not to be saying, there's a discrete, numbered group of people within Israel that are faithful to the Messiah, and they're to be sort of sharply distinguished from the rest of Israel. And sort of is the one part of Israel that's working, the rest of it's not working, kind of thing. And I agree with the Agamben on this. Um, the key, I think, rhetorically speaking, in chapter 11, when Paul introduces this remnant that he is a part of, is that it is a testimony to God's ongoing purpose for all of Israel, for the rest of Israel. So the remnant is not significant only for itself, but it is significant because of what it signals about God's ongoing purpose for the whole of the people. And therefore, for the part of the people that Paul is speaking to the audience about, some of his Jewish family that are hostile to them and that he was grieving over already beginning in the first few verses of chapter 9. So, naming himself as part of this remnant is a way of advocating for that part of the Jewish family that he says to the audience has been hardened, has become enemies of them, but not for this reason have been sort of disowned by God, but instead remain within the reach of God's purpose. They remain part of Israel, and God will finally have mercy on them and will save them as part of all Israel that God will save. So that's how I think remnant works. Um, with respect to Taubes, the the key thing to keep in mind here in the debate between Carl Schmitt, and Taubes is that Taubes is um, questioning something that not was not just the basis of Nazi political ideology, but is the basis of a larger sort of political theory and imaginary that Carl Schmitt was the author of, the purveyor of, and has influenced our whole geopolitical system that we are a part of today. And that idea of Schmitt's was that political order, including the consolidation of political consciousness of a population so that they have this sense of belonging to this country and not that country, um, belonging to one another in a way that they're citizens, unlike the way that they relate to people they regard as foreigners. That, for Schmitt, is built on a sort of primordial distinction between friend and enemy. So, at the root of the nation state, let's say, is this distinction between friend and enemy, whereby the friends that are citizens, as it were, band together, and their most fundamental task is to defend one another against enemies. And this is basic to statecraft in our day, where we hear it repeated all the time that the most basic responsibility of the state is the security and the protection of its citizens against enemies. So Taubes responds to this by saying, that's not what I find in the New Testament, which for Schmitt would presumably be a source of authority because he's a Catholic Christian. And he appeals to Paul and says, here, what holds the people together, what is most basic to um, political unity, consciousness, sustainability, as theologically presented in Romans, is not the distinction between friend and enemy, whereby friends defend themselves against enemies, but instead it is the bond of love. between people who are hostile to each other, because Paul says that what to the audience, remember that while they might be enemies, his relatives that he's describing of yours because of the gospel, according to election, they are beloved because of the ancestors. So the key when it comes to enemies for Paul, when it comes to political hope, identity, etc., is love. So that's what Taubes is saying Schmidt overlooked, and is in fact crucial to understanding what holds political communities together, especially according to God's revelation in the Messiah. Hope this is helpful to you. Thanks again for some great work in week 9.